Hi. I just wanted to talk today about just a few random things that I've talked about before, probably, or at least even if not with y'all on YouTube here, with folks that I know in the community. By the community, I mean the queer community and I guess the radical community, because I guess those are two not really distinct. Obviously, nothing is a distinct community. Um, but those are two different labels because not everyone who's radical is queer. Not everyone who's queer is radical, obviously. So yeah. Anyways, so I was at this really interesting discussion today. Very interesting academic discussion. Just about queerness and I guess queer identity and class slash economic status, kind of the intersections of those two identities or labels or whatever you want to call them, characteristics. And I mean, I personally didn't quite enjoy the conversation too much just because I wasn't sure how there's just so many aspects of those that intersection specifically, and it involves so many other things also. Like, it's just, I feel like it's hard to talk about in isolation about queerness and class, the same way it is difficult to talk about queerness and race without talking about class. um so hey, you know um yeah. So I mean, basically, one of the things that I thought was interesting, and I guess I was sort of jealous about. Now this dude stood up, and not really stood up, but he was talking about um, class and queerness in terms of how his queerness, in a way, propelled his class status, in terms of being perceived as a gender nonconforming female, and now being perceived as a straight male. Um, so and also a straight white male, which I think is really an important distinction to make, because yes, in a way, sometimes someone's gender identity, or I mean, they're also intertwined because you were able to get access to testosterone, which not everyone who's lower class and doesn't have insurance is able to do. Like, or I don't even like saying lower class. Just, people who don't have a lot of money, people who are poor people, working class. It's hard to get access to testosterone. It's hard to get access to any kind of body altering, or like, any kind of therapeutic thing. It's, for example, for me, I know when I leave my job in June, I'm not sure how I'm gonna maintain paying for therapy. Like, I don't know. I'm trying not to think about it, but it's a real issue, and I need to think about it and work around that. Really, but yeah. I mean, it's a lot of stuff. And then also, I thought it was interesting that people at the meeting were just like, "Whoa, you're so right," trans men, like, were just like, "Oh, have you ever written about that?" Like, the fact that you have, like, risen in class because of your queerness, blah blah blah. And I've never heard that, and I was just like, that's funny. I hear that, like, all the time. If you watch any, like, trans vlogs on YouTube, or people talk about it all the time. The struggle of becoming an invisible queer, which is like the trans the trans visibility disappearing, is kind of very similar to, I think, uh, I'd like to compare it to the femme plight. The femme cisgendered uh, queer folk, like, or even just the femme passing queer folk. Like, it, you're invisible, not really an invisible queer, but people perceive you as a heterosexual person often. If you're like, no, if you're like femme, or even if you're a cisgendered or if you're just a male identified person who passes as masculine, let's say, quote unquote. That's a lot of terms, just throwing them around. But or if you're a female, if you're perceived as a female who is feminine, like if you're perceived as those two things, you are the invisible queer. So being a transgendered person who, you know, then is perceived as cisgendered and perceived as whatever gender is generally assigned to your sex that you're perceived as. It's just like, you become that invisible person, and I, I know I struggled with it in terms of just not being able to like be identified with my queer community. Like, I know I've heard a lot of other folks talk about losing their queer visibility and not being able to like talk to folks, being in the room with queer folks and not wanting to out yourself, but like feeling that disconnect because they see you as that straight person, or it's just it's tough, it's difficult. Which isn't always because not, of course, not every trans person is straight, but for those folks who do identify as straight trans folks, it's like, it's tough. You become invisible, and for some people they like that, the stealth, but for other people it's like, it's a struggle. But in the thing that I wanted to bring up is that it also has to do with your like race, because I mean, obviously, it really a lot has to do. Like, if you're a person of color, and you're someone who is perceived as like, if you, let's say, if you're female to male and you're a person of color and you're perceived as a male of color, you're not quite exactly. I mean, you are in many ways gaining more privilege, but in other ways you're also losing a lot of privileges and becoming a target almost. And like, I mean, you're already a targeted population as a person of color or an oppressed population, but like, to be a male of color, like, that's, I feel, I don't want to say that it's more difficult than being a female of color, but it's something that's like, you really, there's a lot of violence upon that community from, like, I feel like a lot of areas. And I mean, I know for me, I'm often perceived as a white male, a white gay male. Honestly, that's what I'm perceived as, and whatever. That's a thing unto itself. But I feel like it's just something that's very interesting and something that's dear to my heart. The privilege, the shift in privilege, and the really complicated like intricacies of being a transgendered person, and how that plays into your privilege, really, because that's all we're talking about. We're really talking about privilege, and how these different groups interact in terms of privilege, and what we really don't talk about what we should do about this. Like, why we don't talk about why these groups have more privilege, like, or what systematically can be done to equalize privilege or anything like that. What is needed to prevent class and race and gender and sexuality, ability, you know, any of these things, to affect our privilege. And it's just, I don't know, I'm kind of just rambling randomness, but I'm gonna let you go with that. Yeah, if you got any thoughts, let me know, because my head is spinning right now. Anyways, I should probably go to bed. It's kind of late. Alright, peace out.